Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. What a great pleasure to see. When you do these sorts of things, you look out in the audience, and I've done a couple of them this week where I look out there and I think, I don't see a single person I know. So it's a great pleasure for me to see lots of familiar faces, old friends, and some colleagues that I've met here this week. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Christian Teleki. I used to be the head of the Ocean Panel Secretariat until 2 months ago. And I'm now the Chief Executive Officer of Fauna and Flora based in the UK. Happy to tell you more about it some other time, but really what I get to is what we're talking about here, something that is near and dear to certainly my heart and to all of yours as well. This today is really about ocean and climate and really advancing this agenda and giving all of you the firepower, as it were, to really create even stronger arguments for engagement on the action that needs to be taken. We'll get into some discussion, hopefully get from the what to the how, and making sure that we help you, give you some ideas that you can take away on how you can advance this agenda. We have a terrific welcome. Thank you for joining us. We'll be taking some questions from at some stage during this, and we're going to take some questions for you here as well in the audience, and we'll try to make it lively. The one rule I ask you: do not stand up and start talking about all the great things you are doing and your organization is doing. I will cut you off. What I would love to do is just, let's keep it snappy, and we'll take a round of questions, and I'll make sure our esteemed panelists as well will give snappy answers, and so we can kind of keep it flow going and lively. We have an all-star lineup. When you do these sorts of things, you never know who's going to be interested to speak and do they have time, especially during this week. And so we'll get to them and we'll hear from them and invite them up. So let's get going. It's with great pleasure that I introduce Henrik Harboe. He is the Prime Minister of Norway's Sherpa on the Ocean Panel and the Ocean Envoy for Norway. And Henrik, would you please give us some opening remarks and perhaps set some context for today's discussion? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Christian, and welcome to you all. And I'm going to try to do exactly that, to give you some context before we go into the content of this very important report. And just some few introductory words about the panel. So the Ocean Panel was established in 2018, and consisting of now 18 serving leaders from coastal states, after Seychelles joined the panel yesterday. Very happy to have Seychelles as a newest member. The Ocean Panel together collectively account for about 50% of the world's coastline and 45% of the world's exclusive economic zone. So this is a considerable part of our ocean. And as you can see from the map, well, that's not the map, that's me. Am I supposed to do something here or what? There you go. Okay, there you go. Okay. So that's I like that picture because it shows sort of the composition of the panel. We have large countries, small countries. We have continental states, if that's a word, island states, north, south, different levels of income. So it's a pretty good representation of the world, and also from the south, countries in the south, and up to Norway in the Arctic, and Canada also, Arctic country. So the Ocean Panel aims to facilitate a better and more resilient future for people and planet. And the goal is to deliver a sustainable ocean economy where effective protection, sustainable production, and equitable prosperity go hand in hand. And that means, the means of doing that is through 100% sustainable ocean management, guided by sustainable ocean plans. Which provide a holistic framework for ocean-related governance to facilitate sustainable use of the ocean and maximize the benefits also for future generations. So these are sort of why we have the panel and the overall objectives. Then coming to this meeting, at the UNFCCC's Global Stocktake, which I guess many have read, published a couple of weeks ago, it clearly states that we need to do more. Climate action urgently needs to be accelerated. We then had our leaders meeting of the high-level panel, Ocean Panel, yesterday, under the co-chairship of the President of Palau and the Prime Minister of Norway. and putting the spotlight on the theme for today also, on accelerating ocean climate action and how the ocean can be part of the solution. And it was a very clear message from our leaders. We need to act, and they also very much welcome the report we're going to talk about today, which gives a menu of options for action. So there's no excuse to say that we don't know what to do. With this report, there is a great menu of options. And this is a report which, as a traditional, how the panel works, putting knowledge at the heart of its agenda. So we have commissioned over the years more than 20 independent, demand-driven knowledge products based on the best science available, peer-reviewed reports, to inform about the vision and harnessing of the latest ocean knowledge, and to develop an action agenda for transitioning to a sustainable ocean economy. So I would recommend you look, well, many in the audience know that already, but on the website of the panel, oceanpanel.org, you can find these reports. Then today we'll introduce the last report produced by the panel. In 2019 already, we commissioned the first report on ocean-based climate solution. And this was one of the first analyses that changed the discourse around ocean and climate, from the ocean being a victim to looking at the solutions that we find in the ocean. And 4 years later, with the timely focus of the UNFCCC stocktake and also the climate summit yesterday and the reflection on where we are with respect to the Paris Agreement, we felt that there was time to reassess and look at the opportunities again. And that's why we initiated this report that we have in front of us today. And the report's findings are compelling. The report says that ready to implement solutions in ocean sectors can provide up to 35% of the emission reductions required in 2050 in order to be on track to the 1.5 degrees target. So this is a considerable part of the emission reductions needed. And to realize the full potential of the ocean to contribute to climate action, we need both to understand the opportunities, understand the challenges, and consider the actions required to unlock the wider range of benefits for people and planet. And this is the discussion that we want to start today with this report. So the first we will do is to go into the content of the report before Christian will moderate a panel with, and he will present later the panelists. So with that, I'm very happy to introduce Peter Haugan from the Norwegian Institute of Marine Research. He has been a contributing author of this report. He is also leading the expert group of the Ocean Panel and has been involved in the panel work from the very beginning. So Peter, please give us the highlights from the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Henrik. Thank you to all of you who are here and online for being here. And it's a great opportunity and a great moment to present this report, which I think is hopefully going to be quite impactful like the previous one. Maybe there was a clicker here that has this. Oh, there we go. Yeah, thank you. Right, so I'm going to jump right into this. You've said it already, the ocean is not only a victim, it's also a reservoir or a source of solutions. And what the question we asked when we did the previous report back in 2019, which was quite specific, which of these solutions can scale to make a difference in 2030 and in 2050? We're not only looking at, possibilities out there. We're not only looking at theoretical potential, we're looking at technical potential, economic potential, and also environmental and social concerns that can limit the implementation of these options. So what we do now in 2023 is sort of the same approach, basically. We've added a couple of sectors. We've added cruise tourism, we've added oil and gas. What does it mean to sort of scale down offshore oil and gas? And we've expanded some of the issues we had with carbon capture and storage. We had that below the seafloor. We are now also looking at marine carbon dioxide removal. But we're still doing it in a similar way. It's a bottom-up analysis of each of the sectors. We ensure that we don't double count the sectors. We have an analysis of the maturity from sort of early research to ready to implement, and technology readiness level, and we have more on finance than we used to have. And so why are we doing this only after 4 years? Well, because there have been unusually fast changes. But first, this is the way it was done in 2019. You see that it's the current policies scenario for CO2 emissions back to 2030 and 2050, the 1.5 degree scenario and the 2 degree scenario. And then we had these back in 2019 based on the data that was available then, that between 20 and 25% of these pathways we could account for the required emission gap and emission reduction. Now we have expanded the author list from 19 to 28. More sectors require more people, and but this is sort of the same basis group. And I like to acknowledge in particular Ove Hugh Gullberg and Eliza Northrop, who have been leading this effort. And I couldn't be here today, but having quite substantial importance to keeping this together. What do we find? These ready to implement ocean-based climate solutions in the 7 subsectors could reduce the emissions gap up to 35% on a 1.5 degree pathway and up to 47% on a 2 degree pathway in 2050. And phasing down offshore oil and gas matters a lot, but it's not all of the sectors are important. And the context, pandemic and war, has certainly influenced some of the sectors quite a lot. Also remember that when we look at the revised numbers, there are projections on, for example, future transport needs, which are different than they were in 2019. The current policies have changed. They've changed to the better in some instances, so the gap to close is different. Let's not spend too much time on numbers here. The report is full of numbers and you can do this in different ways. Just let me state that we start with the mitigation potential in gigatons CO2 equivalent per year, which are down here. And then the gap from the various pathways, 1.5 and 2 degree. And then we calculate the percentages here, and we have a minimum and a maximum range of effects that these options can contribute. Minimum is based on sort of more or less going ahead without making any new efforts for it. So let's go one step further. So these is one of the figures. You can find more of them. This is for 2030, and you see each of the sectors, and I'm going to talk about each of the sectors. We start with marine conservation and restoration, and this is kind of a sector where there's really no regrets. There's a lot of co-benefits. You could say that, you know, maintaining the ocean ecosystems and the coastal ecosystems has a number of benefits, and climate change is only one of them. And let me pause to say that for all of these sectors, we also look at co-benefits and trade-offs with other goals. We have a table in the report looking at organized after the SDGs, where we see that nearly all of these have a quite dominant positive co-benefits rather than negative effects on other aspects. But this is particularly the case there, perhaps. Ocean-based renewable energy is dominated by offshore wind, in particular in the short range. There we have had the evolution that offshore, how do we do that? Well, it's mainly producing electricity that can substitute for the present composition of the electricity, be it somewhat from coal, reducing for that until 2050, more for gas and for other sources. And that's how we compute the saved CO2 emissions. It's, again, I said, the development in offshore wind has been quite affected the last couple of years by the war, which has increased material prices. And so that we have a dip in the last couple of years, but the commitments for future offshore oil and gas has actually doubled in the recent years since 2019. So the potential is quite big. For ocean-based transport, we've had really nice developments in IMO recently, where we have a way of incentivizing finance to drive the transition, which gives it more optimism into the future. Ocean tourism is a small sector, but it's a highly CO2 intense sector. And it also has a possibilities, I think, like ocean transport and offshore wind, to go ahead and be funded to change. Even if there are pledges to reduce the carbon intensity of the cruise transport, it's also a sector that is growing rapidly. So that will quickly kill that effect unless it's really getting bigger. And food, fisheries, aquaculture, and shifting diets, really interesting. We have had very little progress in that actually, but there's an untapped potentials. Offshore oil and gas, what is that? Well, it's based on the IPCC saying that in 1.5 and 2 degree scenarios, we cannot really have new oil and gas, either onshore or offshore. We have a phasing down, not to zero, but a phasing down of the production, and that's what gives this number. And then it says carbon capture and storage. We look at MCDR, marine carbon dioxide removal, broader as well, but it doesn't really make it into these numbers in a significant way. So that was for 2030, similar for 2050, and you see some of the sectors are growing. And again, I don't spend time on that now. You're really encouraged to look at the report and see what it actually is saying. This is just a graphical display of what it looks like in how these sectors. And we have, of course, transport also both in domestic and international transport. Okay, what does this mean? One way of looking at it, it's the reductions are equivalent to 4 times the annual emissions of European Union countries. So that's just sort of to give a feel for what we are talking about. So some messages. Some sectors show added ambition and growth over these 4 years. Significant increase in pledges for offshore renewable energy, doubling more or less. And then there are other options. We have had, wave and tidal energy for a long time. It hasn't really scaled up. What is the problem? Floating solar has emerged as a very promising technology. It wasn't included in these kind of analysis 10 years ago. Floating solar works best in calm waters. We have wave energy possibilities in obviously disturbed waters, so they are somewhat complementary. But again, the scaling is not there yet. Right, and other sectors are lagging behind. Food from the ocean is really a no-brainer that we should have food from the ocean. We should have sustainable fisheries. It's been a problem for years to get that right, to make sure that we don't have illegal fishing, that we reduce the consumption of energy to drive around and hunt for poor fish stocks with poor state. We can produce more from aquaculture, particularly low trophic aquaculture, and then the awareness, the changing of diets is really where it seems to me that we should really be able to do much more than has been the case, and not much has happened since 2019. Then how do we deal with uncertainties? You see down to the right here is this table of technology readiness level that we use. We have 5 sort of categories that we assign to all of the sectors and all of the subsectors. And that's quite important that we do that right and that we do it in a consistent way, which has been a major part of the work here. How do these things work out with uncertainties? We have to make sure that we put effort into sort of developing new technologies, but that shouldn't come at the expense of scaling up those that we know that work. We need both. And And also, in fact, cruise tourism, I think this is the first time we have really an assessment of what these emissions are and what the potential is. The ecosystem loss, not only for climate, but for a host of different reasons, the ecosystem loss must be stopped. And this is maybe a problem of the intersectoral management, I don't know, but there are so many benefits from protecting and restoring coastal ecosystems that it really is a challenge to get this together in a good way. So finance. What we find with finance is that it's very, very different from sector to sector and from region to region. There are some sectors, offshore wind, transport, where finance is there, also tourism, but not in every region. Trying to do offshore wind in a developing country, there are difficulties, and how do we get that going? And then there are other areas which are really different. We have some addition here on what are the numbers needed, and again, I don't go into that in detail. It should be a no-brainer today that the way we do this should be fully aligned with biodiversity protection and zero carbon, but I think it's worthy of stating here as well. So where are we? Policy and priorities for the transition. So systemic level transformation is one key message from here. I haven't talked a lot about the links to land. Some of these sectors are connected. We have been quite put a lot of emphasis on making sure that we don't double count and that we don't sort of assume something that is contrary to the other option. But a systemic thought here and looking at reducing greenhouse gas emissions also on land and decarbonizing the energy system is really critical for all of this. And again, we want to do research in emerging technology, but there can be showstoppers for some of them, so don't delay solutions that can be scaled. And political engagement, yeah, we can discuss this more, I think, in the coming discussion. So I think that was basically my last slide, and with that, I give the hand back to Christian. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Peter, and great to have some insights into that, and we'll get into a little bit more into that in a moment. Could I invite our panelists, please, to come on stage, and then we'll kick things off. Yep, there we go. Fantastic. Well, thanks very much again, Peter, for that. It was really helpful to have those numbers and start. I mean, incredible food for thought, really, and trying to think about how are we going to apply this? What's the compelling narrative? Where are we going to draw that out, and what more we can do with that? And I think certainly the previous report was great fodder for launching the really trying to get. It's bizarre to even say this out loud, the ocean into the heart of the UNFCCC. I just beggars belief, but anyway, we are where we are now, and we are moving forward with speed, with pace, and we have the scientific evidence base that we all knew was there, but now we're putting some numbers to it, which is terrific. Really great to see that number as well. Let's see that 4 times the annual emissions of the European Union. I think that's quite stark, and I think I heard a collective draw of breath in the audience when you put up that figure. We'll come back to that in a moment. But of course, this begs the big question: is it's great to have these numbers, the sectors that are on board, but it's the how. And how is this going to play out? And you have on stage here a group of people that are, will provide some insights into the how, and we'll try to pick that up. What better way to start than the heart of the U.S. government with Jane Lubchenco? Nope, not at all, not at all. Listen, where the power sits. Come on, just for those of you who don't not know Jane, she's the Deputy Director of Climate and Environment in the Office of Science and Technology Policy Executive Office of the President of the United States. You know, she has been a long champion, you know, of the ocean. And Jane, you know, I know that the last report certainly was extraordinarily powerful, and what you were able to do with it. I mean, and it became a shining example how you can take science, translate it, and then mainstream that into you know, into policy. So I guess I'd love your reflections on this, and then in light of this report, what does that then set the tone for the United States going forward?
Thanks, Christian. Hi, everybody. Once my mic is on. Hello, testing. Is it on? Oh, okay, great. Thank you, Christian. And thanks to the Ocean Panel for bringing us together today. This is really a wonderful opportunity to really, once again, shine a spotlight on the importance of the role of the ocean. I think the reality is that what each of our governments do is definitely a whole of government effort. And so I really want to underscore the importance of multiple people and multiple departments and agencies working together to make something happen. And that's what you see happening in the United States. And it starts at the top. And President Biden has made it crystal clear in a consistent, continuous way that it is vitally important that we reduce our emissions aggressively and that we have in place policies that are enhancing resilience to climate change. And so this coupling of mitigation and adaptation is really important. And he has followed that inspiring sort of goal with very specific targets that are science-based, policies that are science-based, and working with Congress, financing to begin implementing a lot of these very unprecedented, bold commitments. And so we see action that is underway and with more to come. The US recognizes that there is no path to a carbon neutral economy. There's no path to a healthy climate without the ocean, which is why we started with the previous report from the Ocean Panel and said, okay, what does that mean for the United States? And this spring, a few months ago, we released our Ocean Climate Action Plan, specifically for two reasons. One, to draw attention internally as well as externally to the importance of the ocean in our climate goals, both for mitigation and adaptation resilience. But secondly, to help us have a holistic approach to the different actions that are needed. So we don't have one thing happening over here disconnected from something else over here. So this Ocean Climate Action Plan, we think, is a really exciting opportunity for our country. And I would suggest that any country who really wants to achieve those things have holistic approaches and also have the visibility on the role of the ocean, create their own ocean climate action plans. And so that's sort of an invitation to others. Let me just say really quickly, the top 3 themes of our Ocean Climate Action Plan are very specifically to, I want to get these right. So I want to
Get the code right.
get my code right. My microphone's in the way, so it doesn't recognize my face. Our Ocean Climate Action Plan has 3 key themes. One is to create a carbon neutral future without harmful emissions. And so that relies, for example, very heavily on our offshore wind, but also green shipping. Those are 2 high profile examples. 2, to accelerate nature-based solutions, and that includes both blue carbon as well as marine protected areas. And 3, to enhance community resilience through ocean-based solutions. So that's climate-ready fisheries, coastal resilience are just examples of that. So we are moving, we are acting, we are needing to join with partners to achieve a lot of these goals, and we're excited for more to come.
Thank you very much for that, Jane. And I think what's interesting about that, you said something there that I think really, you know, resonates. that we all should be taking a page out of that playbook, and that is whole of government. You know, this is not just a single issue that's, you know, stuck in one environment ministry or department. You know, you need finance in there, you need trade, you know, you need all across them and really understanding. I think we see a number of examples around the world that are doing that. But this is not the purview of you know, the United States, you know, a big economic power, you know, and when you look at this, there's something in there for everybody that's going to resonate and that you pick up on. And Ilana, I want to come to you. Ilana is the Palau ambassador to the United Nations, and also President Whip's a representative on the ocean panel. Thank you for being here, but also hopefully your boss is letting you come here as well. So, which really signifies, you know, how important President Whips believes in this subject. So Ilana, you know, very different scale here, very different scale. What's Palau's take on this? What's your view? I mean, what are you thinking about how you're going to advance this agenda?
Thank you, Christian. And on behalf of Palau and Norway, as the co-chairs of the Ocean Panel, we also just want to say thank you to the authors of the report. Terrific job by everybody, and we're very excited to see it launched today. Yes, you're absolutely right in the sense that Palau and the United States are two very different countries. For Palau, we're limited in terms of things like green shipping. We don't have huge technologies. We can't really move the needle on that, but we are a large ocean state. Our exclusive economic zone is the size of France. So our focus really is on blue carbon projects. So I think I'll share some very concrete examples. One is we're working with the National Sun Yat-sen University out of Taiwan, and they just launched their first expedition to mark the carbon, I have to look this up because I'm not a scientist, so carbon flags in the deep sea floor. And that's hopefully to allow us to explore blue carbon in the future. So that's one very tangible example of research that we are currently undertaking. We are also working with a blue carbon fellow that is being funded by the US State Department. And he's in Palau doing research on mangrove, specifically mangrove blue carbon. So he's actually been there since, I think it's been at least 5 years. So his research is quite advanced in terms of the blue carbon space, specifically for mangroves. And he's basically saying it's kind of leading the way in terms of trying to develop blue carbon policy with respect to mangroves and a little bit in seagrass as well. So for example, you know, how much does the mangrove sequester? How does that change annually? How can that then translate into voluntary carbon market revenues? So currently he's estimating that Palau could potentially make between $2 and $5 million annually based on the existing stock of mangroves that we have. Another thing that he's also told us about is that when you disturb the mangrove ecosystem, the research is showing that you do not the carbon sequestration and storage doesn't just stop, it actually starts to emit carbon. And that is a really key learning, I think, for all of us, so that we stop cutting down mangroves and we restore them and we plant more mangroves in our climate-based solutions. I think kind of tangential to that is Palau has also banned deep sea mining and deep sea bottom trawling in our territorial waters because we are concerned that it might unearth a lot of this carbon that's being stored. So that is a domestic policy that we've undertaken. And we're also one of the countries at the International Seabed Authority that's called for a moratorium on deep sea mining in the high seas. And that's because we really believe that we need to take a science-based approach to this policy for mining the seabed, because we don't want to use this kind of work to say that we need these minerals to solve the climate crisis, but actually may end up doing something that will be a negative effect. And so we're advocating for a moratorium until we have enough science to let us make informed decisions. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks very much. Yes, absolutely, and it's a great example of really leading the way, you know, and we certainly appreciate your leadership and President Whips, and really, you know, I mean, Palau may be small, but oof, do you punch up way above your weight? I'm gonna come to Thomson. I'm gonna come to you in a second on blue carbon, because Ilana mentioned that. But Jane, I just want to put you on the spot, if I may, and I'm only doing this because I know you're adept at it. Is there a role? I mean, the United States has set this really the gold standard here in terms of, how do you get cross government? How you mainstream that? And it's one thing to do that, but is there a way that the United States can incentivize, other countries to think about it? I mean, because in the whole government, you have the opportunity. Is there some sort of trade incentives? Is there things that you put in there to say, look, if you join us on this journey, there are ways that we can help you do that. Is that something that the U.S. government is thinking about?
So absolutely. Not only are we thinking about this and acting, but we are working with partners around the world and working together to create either challenges like the Global Shipping Challenge that the US and Norway announced last year at COP27, and for which we now have 50 pledges from other governments, from industry, from other organizations to make specific commitments about making shipping green, essentially. And now with the IMO decision, that actually, I think, reflects some additional momentum and opportunity. And so now we have an invitation to other countries, to even more countries, to join us at COP28 this year and report on progress, but also to make new commitments. And so that's just a specific example that's not a financial incentive, but a social incentive. Let's work together to do something. There are also financial incentives that are opportunities. And so like many other developed countries, we are working with many partners around the world to create either financial incentives or capacity building opportunities, or create the kind of financial policies that are international policies that are then incentivizing the kind of action that we need. One of the key things that we are doing in this regard domestically, but also talking to other partners, is understanding the importance of putting nature on our economic balance sheets and creating natural capital accounts so that we can actually see on our balance sheets what natural assets we have and how important they are, and fold that into our economic decision making. So natural capital accounts and taking stock of what we have through our national nature assessment, which is the first one we've ever done. We've just initiated that. And then shining a spotlight on nature-based solutions. And in each of those, there's a financial incentive element, there is a collective social element, and we're working with many partner countries around the world on each of those.
That's great. And that's a good example of and perhaps a very nice segue to you, Torsten. I mean, I was coming on the government side, but of course, you're reminding us about this to the private sector and business incentives and the role of the intersection point between, business and government. Torsten, you were an author both on this report, but also on the Blue Carbon Handbook that came out earlier this year. Ilana talked about the importance of blue carbon systems. We can only talk about that if blue carbon systems are there and intact. And we need to invest in that. So maybe can you give us some, sort of building on some of the discussion so far, a little bit of thought on what is the role of that sort of that private public interface that could make sure we're maintaining and investing in these blue carbon systems, so countries like Palau and others are going to continue to benefit from the whole range of services that are involved, but also mitigating climate change.
Yes, wonderful. Thanks very much. And I think it's exactly that segue from starting to show the value of nature, these various ecosystems, then starting to translate it into an economic language, which can be a common language across the public and the private sector. And that then leads to an investment language. And that investment language really needs to take into account that the things we start off from on the investment side, which is this very clearly identified carbon value, is really just one component. And the biodiversity aspects, the livelihood aspects, the resilience aspects, all of these are part of that broader blue natural capital. So as we design the financing instruments, we really need to work both bottom up on the project level so that these holistic benefits get delivered, but also top down through structures that allow the funds to flow into the space. And that means we need to work with impact investment structures, we need to work with blended finance. And blended finance is really an interesting topic, because the focus of blended finance needs to be to redistribute the risks in that process in a way that the grant element is there in the beginning to get these processes off the ground, but then the private sector, the commercial investment side, can come in a structure that has risk and returns that actually work for the private sector and translate it into those formats. And that's really where I think a lot of the really interesting work is going on, and where both project approaches but also jurisdictional approaches are crucial. So for instance, with your latest member, newest member, the Seychelles, we've been discussing a seagrass investment pool for the entirety of the seagrass beds of the country. And these are formats that then make this attractive, accessible to the financial industry.
That's a really good example. I think that important notion of making sure we're not blinded by the finance. I think historically in the ocean realm, relatively nascent. I probably would argue we're about 10 years behind the terrestrial world in terms of structuring deals and getting money flows and et cetera. And there are lots of people in the audience here. I see Karen Sack in the back there, and the great work that Aura is doing, and really trying to get the money to the places and spaces that are needed. And there's a real danger that we talk about big money, but we're not thinking about the practical mechanisms. And I was going to push you a little bit on that, but I think you've really demonstrated that you're now thinking about this at a country level, because that's something Ilana is going to be wanting to hear. And I know that in conversations past with President Whips, he's all about, don't talk to me about fantasy numbers, talk to me about the money that's actually going to go down to the ground. And we'll pick up that in a moment. I want to kind of continue on our journey through the report and talking to people. And we have Catherine Matthews, who's the chief scientist at Oceana and one of the contributing authors as well. You were the lead author on the oil and gas section. Wow, what a! I don't know if anyone asked me. I'm not sure I would have taken it on. That's a bear of a but we're pleased you did, right? It was something that it was sort of in the background and a necessity. Can you say a little bit about the sort of the mitigation potential there, and what does the future look like? I mean, I think everyone's sort of scratching their head and thinking, how are we going to get from point A to point B to achieve that? I mean, I look at that number; it's a big number, and tell us a little bit more about that, please.
Okay. Hi, everyone. So to start with, since it's a new addition to the report, it's probably helpful to understand that the scale of the mitigation is really driven by three buckets. The first of which is the most important, which is stopping expansion. So no new drilling. That's the largest contributor. But then, of course, there's the sort of controlled phase down of existing production. So not turning off the spigot right away, but a measured decline over time. And then while tackling that, dealing with the dirtiest production right now, the oil and gas production that has the largest footprint. So that's around things like the ones that are emitting the largest amounts of methane, flaring, that sort of thing. And so of those three buckets, the largest one obviously is just stopping expansion, no new drilling. And I think that alone is about 13.5% of the emissions reductions to by 2050 to stay under 1.5 degrees C, so 13.5% by itself. So as far as transition, right, how do we do this? There's policy and there's money, right? So under the policy category, governments shouldn't be offering new leases. That's a pretty straightforward, easier said than done, but that's obviously the big category. But there's also a finance aspect to this, which is investors need to stop financing new upstream offshore oil and gas projects. And this is something that some people have already started to do. So HSBC, in their updated energy policy last year, put that in 2022. And there's a group called, it's down, the Net Zero Assets Owners Alliance. So together, those investors are worth about 11 trillion. They've also put that in to their energy investment policy. So certainly if there's not money for this, and hopefully that money is going now towards renewable energy investment and not putting it into what would soon become stranded assets, because these are not things that we're doing. Something IPCC has said, something the UN Secretary General has said, and so that's, maybe I should stop. There's more to say, but
That's certainly, that's very helpful. And, and when you think about that new trajectory, I mean, factored in that, of course, is that I think there's something on the order of, 1,600 oil and gas platforms are going to be decommissioned in the next, 2 to, at least, 10, at least 1 to 2 decades. And you're looking at an investment there of 24 billion to decommission those. We're not talking small numbers here, and I think there's something. How do we, factor that in? And I think that's really useful to start
I did mention subsidies, which is like a whole other thing that we can talk about if you want to.
No, absolutely, no, it's true. Well, we're gonna come back to some of these, and no doubt we'll have some questions in the audience. I just want to bring in Brad. Part of the report is talking about carbon capture and removal. I know Ocean Visions have been thinking about this. It's a difficult topic, in some ways. Do you or do you don't? And we're in a position where the numbers are heading in the wrong direction. So we need to start throwing anything we can at this and really, but getting it right. So I guess you give a little bit of sense of a flavor of that, but also, can you assure the audience that we're not going down some barking mad approach where it could potentially be some unintended consequences? So can you give it a little bit more sense about that?
Yeah, thank you for that. And I want to point out, while I'm not a contributing author, our chief scientist, Dave Kowick, led the work on marine-based carbon removal. And so let me just make a couple of comments about this, context setting. So we're now at 424 parts per million of CO2 in the atmosphere, which is about, over 100 parts per million more than any time in the last 800,000 years. So, and the Earth is catching up to that. And it's one of the reasons that we keep finding all of the models showing greater impacts faster than we expected, like what's happened with Antarctic sea ice this year, right? It's 6 orders of magnitude, 6 standard deviations away from the mean, according to the scientists studying that problem, which means that there's something wrong with our models, right? They're not catching up. And so if we really want to be safe, we're also going to have to clean up carbon. So yes, we absolutely have to reduce emissions, full stop. That's got to be job number 1. And right next to it, we have to clean up emissions if we want to ensure a safe planet for our children and for nature. And so that means going below 424 and back down somewhere to around 350 parts per million at the highest, which James Hansen famously warned the US Congress about over 30 years ago. So that's why CDR is so important. CDR is actually not going to help with the emissions gap, right? Because it's not emissions, it's cleanup. Emissions, we have to avoid emissions and stop emissions, and then we have to clean up the pollution. And so we believe that the ocean has a very high potential role to play in doing that because it already does it. If we were to go away tomorrow, if humans weren't here, or we just stopped emitting all of our CO2 and methane and nitrous oxide, over the next few 100,000 years, the ocean would cycle most of that carbon off of land through rock weathering, through the biological pump, and it would deposit that carbon deep in the ocean, what we call deep blue carbon, inert, bicarbonate and carbonate form, not the dissolved carbon that's causing ocean acidification in the upper layer of the ocean. So to answer your question, no, I can't assure the audience this is not, that this is risk-free or that this is a slam dunk. Absolutely not. But neither are any of the things we're talking about here, right? You heard Peter say this is going to require total systemic transformation in order to do the job on emissions reduction. So if we don't want to bet all of our chips on total systemic transformation, which I'm all for, and I want to see it, but I don't want to put all my chips there. I want to put some chips on a couple of other numbers to see if they can also help deliver part of what we need. And so the ocean has enormous promise for potentially being able to help us safely draw down and store carbon, but it's potential at this point. We do not, all we have is opinion and conjecture and small tests. We need to scale that up very significantly. I love the Ocean Climate Action Plan. It calls that out. The National Academy's report has called that out. And now we just need to get going on that testing.
Thanks very much for that, Brad. Catherine, coming back to you, I don't want to I want to take you up on the discussion around subsidies and yeah, and what you said there. I mean, I think you've got two countries on the stage. You know, the United States, Palau, very different geographies, very different scales. What's your advice to them on how they can expand zero emission energy sources, you know, and maybe set the ball rolling? You know, they're going to have different challenges of scale, but I'm surely you've been thinking about this. How do you navigate this complex landscape?
So not having US or Palau subsidies numbers at hand, there are some global numbers on the amount of money that goes towards subsidizing oil and gas production, but also oil and gas consumption. And on the oil and gas production side, I think global subsidies are somewhere around 700 billion, and on oil and gas consumption side, it's 1 trillion. So if all of those dollars are put towards zero emission technologies, or basically doing something that isn't distorting the market to make us want to buy gas because it is cheap, I think that's a massive lever that can be turned relatively quickly, and it's not rocket science. So I think this isn't, you know, people are like, oh, it's going to cost the SDG 14 analysis, I think, for how much money to put in is like something like $150 billion was one of the analyses to put that in place. And if you look at things like, you know, fisheries subsidies, or let's say 30 billion or something like that, there are subsidies on the ground. There is money sitting out there. It is just pointing in the wrong direction. So
that's helpful. Ilana, I'm gonna come to you in a moment, and I just want to get a sense of reality check from you and Palau, you know, and kind of the discussions that you know that you and President Whips and other ministers are sort of having about there's this that we talk about here, and then there's your reality. Yep. And I just want to give you a couple of thoughts on that. What I want to do though is after Ilana you know, gives us a little bit of color and texture on that, I'd love to go out to the audience here, and the rules of engagement are going to be, we'll take 3 short questions if you can. If you'd like to direct them to any individual on the stage, that would be great. And then we'll kind of get the ball rolling there. And then we'll take a couple if they're online. We'll take some from you online, and then we'll try to get the conversation going. I do want to apologize to my panelists because I don't think there were a long list of questions here that I could jump in, but I'm really mindful about these sorts of things of wanting to just, you know, just hear from you out there. I'm sure you got your ideas are flowing, and we'll try to get those as much as possible. So my apologies, I took the moderator privileges in this respect. So good. So Ilana, just a couple of thoughts, just a reality check from you know, a large ocean state.
Thanks, Christian. Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question, because we do have these kind of big policy suggestions, and then when you go try to implement them on the ground, sometimes they don't really work the way that you think they will. So for example, specifically on subsidies, in Palau, our gasoline prices are at about $7 a gallon currently because of the war in Ukraine. And you can imagine for the local fishermen who need gasoline to power their boats because there's no kind of green boats yet, that's a huge impact to their livelihoods and the way they make their income. So what happens when gasoline is $7 a gallon is that government does have to implement subsidies, because then otherwise people are, you know, they experience a huge hardship. So I think that's one of the things, is to be kind of, especially in a developing country, we really want to transition to renewable energy. But we don't create the technology, and so we kind of are at it's a bit of a waiting game for us. However, we do, for example, on the electric grid, we are trying to, because, you know, solar panels and things like that have already exist, we're trying to move to 100% renewable energy by 2032. The challenges with that are accessing finance, and that's a very specific challenge for small island developing states, which I could probably go down a rabbit hole, but I won't do that today. But I guess that's kind of when we do a reality check, I think, and it's not just for Palau, I think even in the United States, when gasoline gets really expensive, people start to complain, and then there's an election, and then things go a different way. So I think that's kind of the reality of, we need to kind of push industry and push policy to push the green transition, but also realize it's probably not going to happen overnight. So
that's perfect, Ilana, to get just a bit of a reality check of this. And we'll take some questions. So if we got some hands up, could we get the mic around, and then we'll take them if we can. If someone can pass the mic around for us. While we're coming, I just want to reflect while we're getting these, we're just, you know, setting these up to get these questions. I often wonder, and I keep thinking that there's a great opportunity here to use, the island context as a test bed, and that, you're providing an opportunity to test something that a renewable energy company would like to test, and it's something that that they obviously want to scale. They can't take it to the United States right away, but they could do something like that. And there's an investment opportunity because you're helping them, test the technology. It just feels like there's something, and I'm sure I'm way behind the curve in this and you're thinking about it, but it's just sort of something that's top of mind. Okay, first question, please. I have right here in the front row.
Yeah, real quick question, something I'm curious about. So how could we quantify and verify the actual blue carbon projects while taking into consideration climate resiliency? So some of these assets like mangroves, seagrass, salt marshes, they will change over a period of time based off of natural causes. So what are the methods that we could use to actually really truly measure what their effectiveness is as it comes to carbon sequestration?
Great.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, Torsten, you start to think about that. Next question. Where's the microphone going?
Sam Teicher from
Yeah.
Coral Vita.
Sam.
There's a line in the report about enacting policies to promote restoration, and restoration needs to be done the right way, so there needs to be good regulation. However, in some countries across state, federal, or county lines, those regulations can change. In some countries, there might be two people responsible for regulating ecosystems that they might not have knowledge of. So what can be done, particularly for smaller countries, to help build capacity so that time is not wasted when restoration is urgently needed?
Great. So I think that's a Jane Ilana question here. We're going to double answer that from different perspectives. That's okay. So you got Torsten, your blue carbon. You're thinking about how to respond to this. We'll come to you in a moment. We'll take one more. Where's the microphone?
Yeah, I
Yes.
got one here. Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you very much. So let me start by congratulating Palau and United States of America for signing the BB&J treaty yesterday.
Hey.
Along with 66 other countries yesterday.
Yeah.
So really, really exciting.
Definitely. So I have a question. Of course, I work in the space of nature-based solutions and restoration, marine conservation, and we know that that's not going to be enough. And if we're really serious about tackling the climate change, we need to start talking about the drawdown. And I was wondering, so perhaps a question more towards Jane and Brad. I'd like to know a little bit also, a little bit of a reality check. Where are we in terms of the science and research? Because there's a lot of interest and entrepreneur and moving forward with ocean carbon dioxide removal. So I'm particularly interested in, as you said, when you're running these tests, because now with the new BB&J treaty, they will be subject to environmental impact assessment, modern ones. So curious to hear a bit about how do you deal with the scale issue when you're running to see what implication, because as you said, whatever we want to do, we need to bring it to scale.
Great.
So how does that react? Thanks.
So Brad, we'll come to you in a moment. And just like I asked everyone to be brief and to the point, if I could ask our panelists to be short and pithy, so we can get to some more of the questions. So blue carbon question to you, Torsten.
And I put that into the broader context of how we translate the scientific suggestions we make here into the language from a financial perspective. Because obviously, as a financial investor, I'm constantly exposed to changes in things. And so the fact that numbers differ and scientists differ is not the challenge. The challenge is, do I have accurate, fast, easily accessible information? And that's where new technologies, new sensing approaches, AI, all of these things will help. And so the revolution here is really to translate our ocean environment into something that is accessible to financial people. And then we need to do the next step of translating it into finance formats that they understand. So for me, we talk infrastructure. That's a segment where we will spend 100 trillion over the next 20 years in any case. This is blue infrastructure. The nature-based solutions are part of delivering blue infrastructure. That's what financial people understand and will commit to invest in. That's how we address this.
Okay, so just as a question, just to make sure, just in terms of, so you think that let's not worry about the effectiveness and the variability, and let's get the sort of the financial flow structures right, and we have a high enough degree of confidence in that variability that's there in order to inform the financial market.
I do
Is that
also have a
right?
scientific
Yeah.
answer to his question, which is so great that blue carbon ecosystems essentially seal off what's already in the sediment. So as long as we can make sure the seagrasses continue to be in place, the mangroves are restored properly, we still have that sediment underneath it. And that's a number that won't change as much.
Great. Okay. We're going to move to Sam's question now. Ilana, do you want to just offer some thoughts on that? Sure. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Okay.
Thanks, Ilana.
Well, no, I mean, look.
No,
this is what you're talking about, the whole government
Yeah.
type of thing, you know?
Yeah, no, this is absolutely right. There's no question that restoration is critically important, and that's especially true for the blue carbon ecosystems we've just spoken of. We've lost a lot of them. We need to restore them. We need to restore them effectively in ways that actually are going to provide the functioning that we need, including storage of blue carbon, sequestration and storage of blue carbon, but all the other important functions that they have. And this points to both of the first two questions really illustrate the importance of ongoing monitoring and measuring and reporting and verification so that we actually have numbers that in fact do reflect the variety, because not all mangroves, not every chunk of mangrove is exactly the same from one place to another, and that might change through time. And so we do need the continuous monitoring, and that's part of what is happening in Palau that Ilana was just talking about, was getting the understanding of how it is variable in space and time.
Yeah.
So the monitoring, reporting, measuring, monitoring, reporting, and verification in a way that shares these data publicly and on an ongoing basis is critically important, and that has to be science-based.
So Jane, I think I want to tease a little bit more out of Sam's question there in terms of, I think part of that, what Sam was getting at also was, you may have a situation in government like you do with big departments that may not be seeing eye to eye when in terms of restoration. And so, I mean, you're very fortunate because I think you've initiated a sort of cross departmental discussion on the ocean, but there may be others that are not. And like, can you say just a little bit more about how can we overcome that? What's the really practical way of doing that?
Most governments like ours have through time evolved to focus on issues and sectors, and having mechanisms that cut across issues and cut across sectors, cut across habitats is critically important. In the United States, we currently do that through the Ocean Policy Committee, which is led by Office of Science and Technology Policy, my office, and the Council on Environmental Quality, and involves all of the relevant departments and agencies and offices that have anything to do with the ocean. And so that's the place where we are doing this whole of government integration. And that's where we surface issues like this. So that's the first answer. The second answer is that in the United States, agencies are instructed as to how to do their regulations in ways that are consistent with the laws and the mandates that they have. And the Office of Management and Budget creates those rules for the regs, if you will. And OMB is modernizing the regulations that give these instructions. And in particular, how we do the benefit cost analysis so that we actually are reflecting a modern understanding of science and economics, and not sort of based on how we've always done it. And one of the challenges in the reason that agencies may have a different opinion about a restoration project is partly because the benefit cost analysis has not always been what it needs to be, and we are in the process of changing that.
Yeah, no, that's helpful. I mean, Ilana, I don't want to put you on the spot. Do you want to add anything you want to add to Jane? I mean, it's a different scale, but you can kind of, I bet in Palau you're kind of doing that same sort of interministerial sort of collaboration.
Yeah, just to quickly add, yeah, absolutely. In Palau, there's a cost-benefit analysis conversation that's happening for sure. I think Palau is a little bit unique in the sense that our mangroves have been protected for a very long time, and they're in very good shape. So we don't really have too much restoration work that needs to be undertaken. So, but that it needs to be science-focused, but there is an economics to the problem that we need to solve. And in Palau, it doesn't necessarily work out in an economically viable way. There's when you have a small population, there's other things that they can do that's more beneficial to the government. So that is a conversation we're having where it's like, instead of restoring mangroves, perhaps we can plant mangrove clams or crabs, and that's actually much more, so there's a trade-off there for sure, but I think I'd just add that.
That's a great, useful get the scale. Let's, Brad, if you want to answer Mina's question briefly. And then I don't know if there are any questions online. Are there 2 questions? Great, I've got a signal there. So if you could briefly answer Mina's, and then we'll get to the question.
Actually, I will, and I'll touch on Sam's because I think it's related, right? I think it's the same thing in the marine CDR space. There aren't people in government or many other sectors who are in a position to actually regulate the process, right? I mean, that's one of our biggest challenges in even advancing science, is that we don't know which exact agencies to work with. And I'm not just talking about in the US, but in general. So for anything that becomes an environmental priority, we're going to have to make sure that there's an enabling regulatory and governance structure to make it work. But to your question specifically, yesterday, a bill dropped in the US Senate to propose 12, what was it? Was it $12 trillion? No, excuse me, $12 billion, $12 billion for CDR research. Senator Schatz, and I don't know who the other co-sponsor was. This is the kind of scale of science that we're talking about. So I think it was 12 billion over 5 or 10 years. The work that needs to be done to prove out or not prove out ocean-based CDR is going to take multiple field trials for every pathway. And those are going to have to be at climate relevant scales. So we're talking about in water trials for each pathway. It's going to take monitoring, reporting, and verification, like Jane talked about, that is got to develop at the same time the technology is being tested, because otherwise we won't know what's happening. It has to take, it takes enabling governance frameworks, again, at the same time, so that the research can take place, the public can be involved, safeguards can be in place. So it is a really massive endeavor. We're working with partners like Woods Hole, who are here, Scripps, OFI, and others, to put forward a roadmap for proving or disproving ocean CDR in the next 5 to 7 years. And it is on its own around 2 to 3 billion out of that 12 billion that Schatz et al. Have proposed. And we really do need that kind of money to do this. This is very big science, but ultimately you're talking about gigatons of carbon removal that have to happen. The IPCC has been extremely clear. It's not optional. We need between 100 and 1,000 gigatons of CO2 removal by the end of this century to have a chance of keeping below or returning from 1.5. If we want to do better and actually restore some of the damage we've done, we're going to have to increase those numbers significantly. So where are we going to get that CDR? That's what the $12 billion bill is going to chase. Is it terrestrial? Is it ocean? We don't know.
Yeah. Very interesting. Thank you for that. Can we have a couple of questions online, please?
So, question from online is, why is the uptake of ocean action limited in nationally determined contributions under the UNFCCC? And could you say a little bit about how to improve the alignment across the NDC and the national adaptation plans?
Ooh, who would like to take?
I can speak to that a little bit. So, I guess the short answer is, I find it actually really surprising. So I'm a negotiator in the UNFCCC COP, and it's pretty surprising as an ocean country that the ocean dialogue is not really built into the climate space. It's actually something that we're constantly fighting to put into that document, because when people think of climate, they all think terrestrial, or they think, solar energy and things like that, and they forget that the ocean is like a huge part of the solution. And it is being impacted by climate change. So one is just a lack of knowledge, I think, and so it's a lot more advocacy that ocean countries need to do. The second is, unfortunately, the way the agreement is written is that there's no standardization of the NDCs. So countries are free to choose whatever they want to put in there, and there's no harmonization. So it's actually quite difficult to map out how a country's reporting and what their priorities are. And it's built that way because they want countries to kind of set their own priorities, but as a result, it's a bit of a mess in terms of trying to understand what goes into an NDC. So I don't know what the answer to trying to fix that is, but I think the more advocacy we have, hopefully as part of the ocean panel, to try to push more ocean-based actions into the NDCs and the national adaptation plans would be probably a key role that we could play.
I suppose the answer is the next time around, we make sure that they're actually in there from the start, rather than to add them on at the end. John, there was another question online.
From Daniela Hill online, she's asking, she's bringing people into this. How important is ocean literacy and bringing in kind of wider society to some of these transformational changes?
Very interesting question. Peter, do you want to say some words on that? Sure. It's not in the report, but it's really, really crucial, I think. And it's something that, ocean literacy started as an educational activity here in the US some 10, 15 years ago. It started to spread, it started to get more and more a broader meaning to the word literacy. It's not only education in schools, it's for everybody, it's from kindergarten to everybody in society, and making sure that people actually realize what the ocean is all about. That is so important. We are land animals, right? We are not ocean animals, and to understand what's really going on and all the immense, the vastness of the ocean, the enormous fact that we have, biological life, not only in an area, but in a volume, 3-4 kilometers, and there's life everywhere, and there's different life forms. And there's all of these possibilities that we talk about here today. So, whatever we can do to improve ocean literacy, I think is a key to actually achieving support, political support, and other support.
And of course, we're in the the UN Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development. I mean, a key opportunity to do that. I would also say that when I look at the report, and I look at some of the reports that I was involved with in previous times, in reality, they may not be as accessible as we like. We tried to, those ones that I was involved with, you tried to write them with a policymakers in mind and, with a view, but our good friend online here just doesn't remind me that maybe, as a group of translators that are out there and very effective communicators, I see a whole bunch of you in the audience here. It's important for you to, it behooves you to take some of these messages and translate those and communicate those into appropriate ways for your audiences and stakeholders. So I think it's a very important point. So thank you online for that question. Guess we have one or two, maybe we can let's do 3 more questions if that's possible. And then Peter, we're gonna get you to come up and rally the troops and get us excited about what comes next after this. So please, at the back.
Yes, sorry, but I was not 100% satisfied by the answer on the subsidies. And I wanted to know whether there is a work going on maybe targeting more specifically, bringing subsidies on targeted kind of topic, because I hear that there is some illegal fisheries, and in the same way we do the subsidies to make sure that fishermen, the legal one, but then also the illegal ones,
sure,
can do their work. And so,
okay.
Is there,
Sounds good. Okay, I'm going to hand that to you if that's okay, Catherine. Do we have another couple questions? Yeah, Ruth in the front here, and then we've got one right there. So, John, can you pass Ruth there? Ruth is in the green, and then, yeah, please, you in the back first. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, hi. There was a bit of discussion around bringing in the finances into any of the recommendations. Has anyone on the panel been approached or is involved with TNFD? So the Task Force on Nature-Based Financial Disclosures, and if so, what has been your experience on that? If you could just illustrate them.
Great. I think maybe you can say a little bit about the finance, just very briefly, and then maybe Ilana and Jane, you could just I don't know if you have a view. Ilana, we'll come to you on the TNFD. Okay, not yet. So maybe not. I think that's because it's so new. If I can just speak on behalf of the panel countries, I think they're kind of looking and watching and waiting, but I think Torsten will have something to say about that, and we'll come to you in a moment. So we're gonna have Catherine on subsidies, TNFD with Torsten, and then Ruth, final question, give it to us, please.
Thank you so much. What I observe in this conversation, and it's very, it's a fantastic conversation, but the pathway to impact, the pathway to the change we needs to incorporate the engineering that will happen between the ideas, the investment, and the infrastructure to the consumer, the person in the street switching a light on or making the choices, and their safe choices. So I just wonder if the panel has reflections on how to bring the engineers into this discussion, who are the fixers and changers of the world. They are the ones that will do the rewiring if they're told what to do. So I just wonder how you're going to bring those people in.
I wonder, Brad, if, Jane, maybe Jane and Brad, they can give us some different perspective on that. I think would be great. So, okay, very briefly, if we can,
I'll go quick.
subsidies,
Okay.
TNFD, and then we'll get to the engineering question, and then we'll invite Peter up to give us a few words closing.
Okay, well, for the audience, there's sort of two categories of subsidies that, just so people have them separate in their minds. The subsidy numbers that I was talking about originally were about oil and gas subsidies and fossil fuel subsidies, which is one category of conversation, but the question was about fishery subsidies. So I could talk about that briefly because there is a relationship to this.
I think it's important to give, because there are some linkages there. It's hard
Yeah,
to distinguish.
yeah, exactly. So harmful fishery subsidies are a massive problem. They distort markets. They make fishermen engage in unsustainable behavior for a variety of reasons. And inside harmful fishery subsidies are fuel subsidies. And so when you have cheaper fuel, you'll go farther. You'll have fisheries that previously were not profitable become profitable because of subsidies. So there is actually a connection between harmful fisheries subsidies and fossil fuels and oceans as a solution for climate change. And so the WTO had an agreement that came out last summer, which did not address the issue in the way that it should have. And they're engaging in a second negotiation right now, which I certainly hope better deals with the issues that you raised, which is not just about, oh, you can't subsidize illegal fishing, which of course you shouldn't be subsidizing illegal fishing. It seems astonishing that we should have to say that out loud, but to actually deal with the subsidies that facilitate overcapacity and overfishing, which they need to hit head on. And I think that would do, that in terms of co-benefits, that would do much more than just deal with cheap gas letting you fish farther away, but would deal with sustainable fisheries and climate issues.
And so just to that point, Peter, next time you're meeting with Dr. Ngozi, I would put this on the table just in terms of if they're going to this fuel subsidies negotiation, let's not de-link that. I mean, as Catherine says, and we've got some hard data that supports why we should be heading that direction. I just put that on your table, some food for thought, Peter.
To-do list.
Yeah,
It's
to-do
long
list.
to-do
Peter's
list.
list is to do, but you know what? As we know, Peter is like the action bunny. I mean, he just will keep on going. So, TNFD, please.
Yes, we have a really interesting process going on of what I call ocean literacy for finance, and this is part of it. And what was great was we got a marine biome into that first iteration of the process, but just one of them, just the coastal one. So we need to continue to push that kind of education, engagement, disclosure process reverberates around the financial industry. And that's really one of the work streams that comes out of all of this, because giving that information, giving the disclosure provides then the opportunity for finance to make investment decisions that take positive impacts on oceans into account. And just a final comment, we've just had progress on the development finance institutions to do ocean positive action, have a workforce around that. So each sector of the financial industry is called to engage with this agenda and can contribute. And so that's why these new disclosure regimes can be really helpful.
Thank you for asking that question on TNFD, because I've been wondering about this, and I think watch this space and more to come. I think it's someone. I think there's a lot of figuring this out and how it's going to be applied in different circumstances, particularly in the marine environment. Okay, briefly, Jane, do you want to say something about the engineering question that Ruth raised?
Yes, thank you, Ruth. Engineers, critically important, no doubt about it. I want to broaden that a little bit to just underscore the importance of thinking holistically about the nature-climate connections. And we and others are really trying to have these de-siloed, because they have been far too siloed. Part of that on the US side is understanding the power of nature-based solutions, not only to climate, but to other things. But in the nature-based solutions and climate category, I mentioned that we released a nature-based solutions report, a roadmap that identified the impediments to implementation of nature-based solutions, one of which is lack of even understanding that there are options, and then lack of understanding of, okay, how do you do it? And what are the trade-offs? In which case, which is more expensive if you have a bunch of options, et cetera. in response to that report, we have had overwhelming interest expressed by the engineering community in the United States, and new partnerships that we have formed with them. The professional scientific or engineering societies, for example, are creating a whole new work stream around identifying nature-based solutions, building the certification programs, building the training programs, so that communities that want to use nature-based solutions can actually go to the experts that they would go to and have them be knowledgeable. And so there are huge opportunities. And that is one of the many examples of what we're collectively talking about today, which is, to quote John Gardner, we are confronted by breathtaking opportunities that are disguised as insurmountable challenges. And that is sort of, linking all of these things together, and converting those into these breathtaking opportunities, and realizing that means having these holistic solutions that are looking at nature and climate and ocean in an integrated fashion with people at the center.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for that, Jane. Really briefly, yes, yeah, it's a great way. Just really briefly, yeah.
Hard to add much.
I know, indeed.
That was well said. All I would add is it's not just engineers. We need people from all disciplines at this point in time. This is the biggest challenge that we'll ever face. We need people with expertise in synthetic biology and AI and finance and law, in communications, in social engagement, the whole gamut, right? Because we're talking about re-engineering systems that we have engineered. All of the systems causing the problems that we face today, we engineered them intentionally, and they solved a lot of really important problems like hunger and shelter. But now we need to re-engineer them so that we can live in balance with the planetary boundaries, and that's going to take a lot of disciplines.
Thanks very much, Brad. And I just, not to put you on the spot, Ruth, but I think the Lloyd's Register Foundation is doing some really interesting thinking on connecting a whole range of issues that we care about in this room. And I encourage you to, have a look on their website, look at some of the things they're doing. I know Ruth and Suzanne are right there, and I know they'd be happy to talk to you a little bit more about what they're doing, but it really is trying to bring some of these issues together in a real meaningful way. So I just, not to put you on the spot, but I think it's to want to shout out there. Great, okay. If we could just stay here on the stage, if that's okay. Peter, could I invite you up to say a few words? Peter Thomson, the UN Secretary General Special Envoy for the Ocean, just to kind of round us out in your sort of top line thoughts, Peter, of what you've heard and your perhaps action of what this group would take forward, and those online, of course, as well.
Thanks very much, Christian. That was a fantastic panel. In fact, I just want to say something about subsidies, because you all sort of touched on subsidies, and Ilana touched on the fact that we need subsidies for our outboard engines. I come from a Pacific Island country too, and it's true in the Pacific Islands. I suppose islands everywhere. We're all just burning fossil fuel with our outboard engines going buzzing around while we talk about the terrible things that the industrialized North is doing to us. We have the technology. It's there for us to all be using electric outboards. Some of us, like Fiji, we're mainly hydropower. Solomon's is hydropower. We just need to plug in on the wharf and have electric outboard engines. Simple. But why don't we do it? Because the fuel industry, the fossil fuel industry is subsidized to the hilt, and the electric outboard engine industry gets nothing. It's expensive new technology. Well, subsidize the electric outboard engines. You end a war and you say, hand in your Kalashnikovs and we'll give you a plow. That's what you do. And so, give us your outboard, the old dirty outboard engines, we'll give you a new electric one. And if that sounds like hyperbole, remember that we are at war. I mean, the Secretary General of the United Nations, arguably the leader of humanity, has said we have been at war with nature and then it's time to make peace. So peace, come on, let's get rid of all that dirty technology. Let's be plain. We all know what the cause of our problem is: burning fossil fuels. We have one simple remedy: stop burning fossil fuels, okay? The alternatives are there. So look, I've got a long speech that I was going to give, but the word pithiness was mentioned, and it reminded me of Robert Cohen when he finished 40 years writing the New York Times, and he said that brevity is the bitter stimulant to pithiness. So I've put aside my speech, and I'll just say a few brief things. I would like you all to go away thinking, if you probably you all got, well, some of you got children and grandchildren in my case, and you probably think about their perspective in life more than your own, right? Because that's really what matters, the continuity and looking after those that are coming after us. And I'm sure you've all read the articles about what young teenagers are thinking now. We don't have kids. You know, there is no future. You know, they've read the reports. When they're little kids, they can still have fun, but as soon as they read the reports, the gloom that sets in is a real worry for human society, because the continuity is what Homo sapiens is supposed to be all about. And how do you overcome that sense of despair that a young 13-year-old feels as soon as they learn the truth about what is ahead of them? A world heading towards fire and famine and plague and 3 degrees. You know, if you live in Eastern Libya or you live in Maui, you already know what hell on earth is like. But this is going to be hell on earth that's going to just proliferate during their lives. And my 3-year-old granddaughter, when she's 50, she's going to be living in hell on earth. And so, you know, that's just an unacceptable future. And so please see the world from the perspective of young teenagers, because that's actually the most positive way to, you know, start transforming, as we all must do. Look, there's bad news, and I'll get rid of that quickly as far as the ocean is concerned. You know, we all know the ocean acidification, ocean warming, and deoxygenation is going to continue long after we're gone and long after we've done all the good things that we are going to do. And that's unfortunate, because it's just the effect of what we've been putting in the atmosphere. And that has, of course, very negative implications for sea level rise and death of coral and that sort of thing. But the good news is we are doing something about it. And we can fix things like pollution and overfishing and bad fisheries practice. That's all man management. We can do that, and we are going to do that. But look at this amazing tide that's running at the moment. You know, these multilateral agreements. Supposedly we live in a toxic world of internationalism, true at a political level, but at a level of what is being done on environmental agreements, it's amazing. There's just a rush. If we've been told 5 years ago that the WTO, yes, they got rid of the illegal fishing one, but they're moving very fast on the overcapacity one, and hopefully at the ministerial meeting in February next year, that also will be banned, subsidies for that. Look at the High Seas Treaty, signed, as Jane said, 66 countries already. Look at the Global Biodiversity Framework. We were, you know, thinking 10% would be good. Now 30% by 2030 is where we're going to go. And I'm missing one other really big one. What is it? Somebody remind me. There's a fourth really big one.
Plastics.
Sorry?
Plastics.
Yeah, imagine you're up against the most powerful industry in the world, the petrochemical industry, and you imagine that you can get an internationally binding treaty in place by the end of next year to control plastic pollution on this planet. We're going to do it. And, you know, all indications are that negotiations are heading towards conclusion of that treaty next year. So there's this amazing tide of really good things happening. And this report that we are hearing about today, 35% of the emissions gap. I mean, this, you know, this is what I'm telling my young teenagers: get involved in these sectors that this report identifies. That's your career. Get into those. There's 5 good things of career structure there for you to get into, girls, and that's where I'll be pointing them. And of course, if I'm going to speak on their behalf, I will say what I was going to say in my written speech, which is that the demand of intergenerational justice is that we make peace with nature. And if you think of nature as life, you know, we sometimes use this word biodiversity, but it's basically life we're talking about. The seas are where the remedies lie, because over 90% of the living space on this planet lies in the ocean. So thank you to the authors of the report. Thank you to the Ocean Panel. You've led us on this, all these amazing discoveries about positive paths ahead. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Peter. And thank you, Peter, for reminding us about making peace with nature. And as it turns out, it is also the International Day of Peace. So rather fitting way to end. Thank you online for joining us. Thank you in the audience for joining us. Thank you to my esteemed panelists. Thank you to the authors. Thank you to the panel. Please go out and spread the message that there are ocean climate solutions, especially as we head into Dubai. We need to encourage and strengthen, like this important person sitting next to me here who is going in. We need to make sure that she's supported and her compatriots are supported who are really trying to put the ocean as high on the agenda as possible. So thank you all. Thank you very much. And I wish you a good rest of your week in New York. Thank you very much.